when a situation where you find that look at this,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV, reaching you from Nigeria's capital in Abuja. We'll take a look at the dailies now on Daybreak, and that's talking about our newspapers now, beginning with the Daily Trust newspaper. The lead story here on the Daily Trust newspaper says, as FEG winds down, Buhari seeks Senate's approval for 539 billion naira judgment debt pay. It has the riders that says it directs ministers to remain in office till May 29. We gave our best, President tells cabinet members. Recent actions not illegal but morally defective, says Don. Now you have above the lead story, Minister of State portfolio unconstitutional. Keamo tells Buhari on page 34. FEC approves multi-billion naira power project in Daura. Others on page 8. After 17 months probe, Reps panel fails to ascertain daily petrol consumption on page 23. You have below the pictorial, Nigeria's GDP growth slows to 2.31% in the first quarter of 2023 amid cash crunch on page 23. 3 siblings found dead inside landlord's jeep on page 20. FG launches cooperative scheme for ex-Niger Delta militants with 1.5 billion naira. Nigeria spent $8 billion to restore peace in Liberia, says Irabo. These are the main stories on Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
All right, moving on to the Nation newspaper this morning with the major headline, Buhari battling to cope with last-minute pressure. Military trop brass send off CNC, and President charges armed forces to do more on security. And to other stories, why we picked up Pabio by Shatima and Uzoduma, OK's APC's choice. Buhari seeks not to pay $556 million, £98.5 million, and 226 billion judgment debts. An interest rate hit 18.5%. FEC still alive, says federal government. Nigeria's airplane to fly in, well, you want to know when that will be, and your chieftaincy bill passed. And of course, we have that advertorial by the High Chief Government Owazide Okpemepolo, popularly known as Tom Polo, the Ibiwoye of Ijaw Nation. They are thanking the president, or rather saluting the president for what he has done for the region. And these are the major stories on the front page of the Nation newspaper. All right. Looking at this day Nigeria, this Nigeria has the lead story that says speakership race. Gbajabiamila Wase clash during plenary. Support for Abbas, Kalu in 10th Assembly leadership. NILDS event spark controversy. Reps not about you, but us. Deputy Speaker challenges Speaker. You have NGF gets new chairman as Tambuwal bows out. Tina Turner, Queen of Rock, and Roll dies at 83 in Switzerland. New Federal High Court will reflect Rivers standard, says Wike. We have Buhari appreciates ministers for their loyalty at valedictory FEC meeting. CBN battles rising inflation with 18.5% interest rates. These are the stories on the cover page of This Nigeria. All right, we'll move on to the Nigerian News Direct. 10th National Assembly leadership, Gbajabiamila Wase, face off in open house at plenary as interest coalition tears 9th Assembly leaders apart. And to other stories, shareholders applaud Fidelity Bank for exceptional performance in 2022 full year.
Consensus Senate presidency is against the resolve of the Nigerian people. And to other stories, alleged internet fraud. EFCC arrests 44 suspects in Benin City. And UBA Africa conversation, it is time to unlock Africa's growth potential. Panelist. Again, CBN raises baseline lending rate to 18.5%. These are the major stories on the front page of the Nigerian News Direct.
All right. The first news, on the first newspaper this morning, the lead story, it says 10th House, drama as Speaker, Deputy clash during plenary, engaged in war of words. You are challenging me, Gbajabiamila fumes. What do you mean? Wase replies. This is the lead story on the first news. Well, very interesting how the paper tries to capture the words in the quotes. In fact, taking quotes from what happened, the exchange of words yesterday. Well, other stories there. Just beside the masthead there, it says Akpabio, Senate President, should be Christian for Nigeria's unity. Shetima as group roots for ex-Akwa Ibom governor. I hope Daura won't be too far for you after May 29, Buhari tells ministers. Well, interesting.
Whatever that means.
Okay, well, perhaps another FEC meeting will be holding in Daura after the president has moved there. 10th House leadership, 63 members elect endorse Abbas Kalu. Buhari requests Senate's approval of 226 billion naira, $556.8 million, 98.5 million euros there to pay judgment debt. You also have other stories below the picture, the lead story. Stay in office till May 29. Buhari orders ministers, refuses to dissolve cabinet after valedictory FEC meeting. Sanwo-Olu directs commissioners, others to declare assets, quit office. Appointment of ministers of state unconstitutional aberration. Keamo. Nigeria airplane to be delivered Friday, says Sirika. These are the main stories on the first newspaper.
Interesting promise there, it appears.
Yes.
We move on to the blueprint. 10th National Assembly, Gbajabiamila was a clash at plenary over speakership. Shatiba backs Akpabio Barrow for Senate President, Deputy. 4 days to go, Ozokome cautions as Buhari seeks Senate nod for $704 billion judgment debts. Fresh 800 million loan request makes no sense, Afeba Babalola, and make Chapter 2 of Constitution justiciable to promote accountability. And that's from a senior advocate of Nigeria. Minister of State redundant under Buhari, Keyamo Ramatu. Africa needs $2.7 trillion to upscale climate adaptation by 2030. That's the AFDV boss, who incidentally is a Nigerian. And Ramaf jacks up public officers' pay by 114%. Judges get 3 special allowances. And CBN ups interest rate to 18.5%, highest in 22 years. And PDP to FG, don't stall Supreme Court judgments on Tinubu with public holidays. These are the major stories on the front page of the Blueprint newspaper.
All right. Now, the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning, the lead story there says 5 days to go. Buhari seeks Senate approval to pay $566 million. You have 98 million pounds, 226 billion naira judgment debt. You also have CBN raises interest to 18.5%. UBA celebrates women, harps on potentials innovation in Africa. Access Holdings poised to be among top 5 banks in Africa by 2027. Quite a number of stories. You have Gbajabiamila, who was a trade words at plenary. You also have don't accede to President's fresh loan request. Affair Babalola tells National Assembly. You also have Abiodun Amosun clash over sitting of Dangote refinery in Lagos. Well, these are the stories on the cover page of the Nigerian Tribune this morning.
Well, the refinery is already there. It's been commissioned. What is the loss of Ogun State is now the gain of Lagos. But more importantly for Nigeria, it doesn't matter where that is situated. It's in Nigeria, and we hope to draw maximum benefit from it. And moving on to the Daily Independent, Keyamo to Buhari, ministers of state were idle, and it's unlawful. Minister of State's job minus for Buhari's government minister. And cash crunch dragged Nigeria economy down to 2.31% in Q1, of course, in Q1 2023. And of course, you have there that same letter of High Chief Government Tompolo, virtually on most papers, the front pages of most papers this morning. These are the major headlines on the front page of the Daily Independent.
All right. So that's the last paper that we are looking at. We'll be getting more perspectives to some of these stories just before guest reviewer comes in. But quite interesting stories, really. If you, one of the controversial statements from the papers this morning is that of the Festus Keyamo, Minister of State for Labor, where he berated, the unconstitutionality of the office, the very office he holds, as a matter of fact.
And enjoyed for the period it lasted. a lot of
reactions have trailed this statement on social media, of course, as expected. And people are saying, well, why were you mute all along until now? But to be fair to him anyways, he said that it's not a statement of ingratitude, but it's just his own way of making contributions going forward. So to say that the relationship between the Minister of State and the Minister, it's not been a very cordial one from what he has experienced, and there's need to find a way to, make this perhaps much more, find a better way of that these ministers will relate, because he's talking about the Minister of State having to go through the minister to consult, to make decisions, or even to get permits for certain things and all that. And that, for him, it's not really, for you to say that the Minister of States have been idle for the past 8 years, okay. So some people are saying, perhaps that explains why you are always on Twitter and sharing, posting statements here and there.
In this issue, there are quite a number of things that were unsaid, but they are quite instructive. They are embedded in that message if you choose to look deeply. One of them is the fact that he said a lot of people, a lot of his contemporaries, Minister of States, were not comfortable, but they chose not to speak out. In other words, somehow it appears all the Minister of States have found a way of talking to themselves and have expressed about the same kind of sentiment, which for me is a very important parting shot to the president, and especially for the incoming president, because at the end of the day, each of these ministers are supposed to come from every state of the federation. And so when you subject the representative from a state to the Minister of State's position, where another minister from another state is the substantive minister, it basically implies that you have subjected the representation from that state as a junior cabinet member. And what he said are true. People bring their idiosyncrasies to this position. So no matter how fly, to use that loose language, your ideas are, if the minister is not comfortable, it just doesn't get to the council. Ideally, as a council member, as a council city member, you should be able to bring your ideas on the floor. Imagine if you are even having a conversation in council and you have an opposing perspective to your substantive minister, and he has spoken before you and told the direction. It will amount to some kind of insubordination or even rivalry for you to then speak up in the same council, taking an alternative position. So there are loads of conflicts that he has mentioned. He's a lawyer, and a very dogged one for that matter. We know his antecedents. If he's picking up about these issues, they are salient issues, like he said, apart from the unconstitutionality, it just basically reduces those people to just people who are supposed to attend a council meeting, rather than sort of bring some kind of robustness to what happens at council. So what he said is, well, he has enjoyed it. Maybe he needed to have enjoyed it to understand how redundant. And he could also speak to why he was moved from the Niger Delta Ministry under Akpabio to Labour.
Maybe he couldn't bear it any longer.
Yes. So very interesting comments there. Maybe someday in his memoir we will understand the deeper meanings of some of the things he has said.
Yeah. Well, he also makes certain suggestions. Anyways, if I may, just to go to the specifics and quote him, he said, what is the way forward? Obviously, the argument that 2 ministers are crammed into some ministries in order not to unnecessarily proliferate ministries and therefore save government's money is no longer tenable. This is because government does not need any extra infrastructure or more money to maintain all senior 36 ministers or even a bit more appointed, as is now the custom. This is because the present ministers and ministers of state have their separate offices, cars, security personnel, and personnel aides. So what is the point? If you are appointed, if you serve your state, if you underwent the same training, you attend the same FEC representing your people, why then is your voice hinged on another minister's voice? Why is lack of planning on another minister's part an emergency on yours? Why is the label ineptitude now the label you will carry if he should fail? All these should be looked into by the next administration to put the country in the good path of trajectory. Well, those are some of the things that he's saying. So he's leaving it on the table of the incoming administration to look into. So should we be cancelling the office of the Minister of State?
Well, I think he said quite a number of things that are instructive for the new president to really chew. There are quite a number of things. I don't see, first of all, as a person, I don't see the need to have 36 ministers and then go on to have one from each of the region and end up mopping them into minister. In fact, at some point, we had 2 ministers of states under a particular minister. When what he's saying is that you could have reduced those responsibilities. I mean, in the Ministry of Transport, for instance, you had aviation, who initially was a minister of state, then became substantive minister. You could have that. You could have a minister of finance. Then you could break, rather than have a minister of state for budget and planning, why not have the minister of budget and planning as a standalone, rather than subject his idea to a finance minister for some kind of ratification or it becomes a proxy or speak through a proxy. So we could break that and have them stand alone. Instead of having a minister of youth and sport, what stops you from having a minister of youth and other things, and then a minister of sport? Like he said, you have to maintain the 2 of them anyway. So why not delineate the responsibility and hold people accountable for their ineptitude, and then hold, like he said. I mean, we know ministers where we have had docile ministries where we have had docile ministers, but the minister of state could be agile. But there is that saying in the circle of government that you cannot outshine your master. So even if you have the best of your idea and your master is unwilling to move, then everybody is stuck.
Yes. So beyond the sensation, and the controversy around the statement, it may sound, in a way, not very, very palatable. But then these are the facts that the incoming administration will need to look into, and face them.
Yeah.
Well, other stories are here as well, very interesting ones. Another one says, after 17 months probe, Reps panel fails to ascertain daily petrol consumption. Yeah. So this is yet another controversy.
Absolutely. When we were working on that story yesterday, when it came, it's quite interesting to think that since January last year, that committee touring everywhere with the privilege and powers of the National Assembly to summon anybody to seek explanation from just about anywhere within this jurisdiction, they were unable to ascertain that and ended up with an average figure that was given by another agency. I mean, having spent that money, time, public resources to come to this conclusion is laughable. And it speaks to why we have remained where we are in terms of planning and execution. Because if you wonder how government arrived at the conclusions that its policies and plans or actions have yielded any kind of results, because they are not anchored on any statistics that are verifiable, so you can't wake up and say, okay, this puts a whole lot of question mark, for instance, on how much we even claim to have spent on subsidy. And what parameters were used in arriving at those payment. What was relied on, and that template or whatever it was, and how much of what appears to be like a sleaze is happening with government agency. We should be able to measure these metrics at every point in time. We should be able to even show when these things spike and what could have accounted for those spikes and when they drop and all that. If we're unable to do that, every other thing we are relying on to you take actions within government circle around this data is absolutely false. And
exactly, you get a sense of, looking at this story, you get a sense that perhaps some interested persons will rather not let Nigerians know and have the actual data as regards daily
consumption. It is an ambiguity that these people try.
Yes, and that also raises questions about the recently commissioned Dangote refinery. I've heard people say, well, the Dangote refinery, which we know will produce 650,000 barrels per day, right? And we understand that it's going to take care of Nigeria's daily consumption,
which is
locally, and still will be enough, for export and all that. So how did we know, the daily consumption if we really cannot say? At the last time when this panel was having its interrogations, you had the customs CG Hamid Ali say one thing, and then you had another argument from the petroleum minister saying, no, is this figure? The customs CG saying, no, it can't be, because we are at the borders. We are the ones that control the movements and see how the petrol is being moved. So how do you arrive at that? So all those kind of debates and controversy, I think, needs to be put to rest. Let us have something that we can use, something that you can actually defend. So
absolutely,
it's not in the interest of the nation for it to remain in secrecy or ambiguity.
That's right. And then we had this story from FEC, winding down with yet another approval, or rather, letter from the president seeking approval for a total of 539 billion. Another paper said over 700 billion, depending on what exchange rate you had used to collate those various figures in dollars and in pound sterling. But what's amazing is why this approval is coming now. These judgment debts were not issued yesterday. Some of them have been there, and it would be good to even know which are these cases that the government actually lost, or judgments were preferred against the government that led to this cumulative amount, because this marks of some level of irresponsibility. What is it we are not doing right? It is the action of people in government that are resulting in these losses. For instance, you had issued the same government would have issued, let's say, a certificate of occupancy to a Nigerian who had gone through all of the process to erect a structure, and then you wake up somewhere midpoint and say that structure is lying on a seaway line or something. And without recourse to due process, you bring in the bulldozers because you can afford to just commandeer them to the venue and bring down the building. And these persons decide to approach the court for justice. And somewhere along the line, justice is served and pronouncements are made about compensation and all of that, resulting in a double whammy. First of all, it's a colossal waste of resources, that should have been deployed to something else, occasioned by the actions of some government officials who have failed to carry out due diligence. And now a judgment debt comes up, and they accumulate these things across various sectors of government. In other places, they enter into a contract, and some other persons come into the office, violate the terms of those contracts, or even revoke them without recourse to some other conditions that are laid out. We see that even with a little thing as a football coach contracts abroad. If you sack them before the termination of their contract, there are preconditions. There are things you have to pay certain amount. Otherwise, all other operations of yours as a club will be stalled. And that is how we have accumulated this huge amount. It's basically half of them are basically occasioned by recklessness. So people should be held accountable. We should be able to tell what actions of government led to this judgment debt. So we begin to understand how we can then come up with policies or law to remediate the behavior of people in governments that can amount to this kind of colossal waste. I mean, this amount is bigger than the budgets for so many ministries. Bigger than the budget for so many states. In fact, you can combine 4 or 5 states to raise this amount of money for what appears to be carelessness on the part of public officials.
True, I agree totally. Now, let's take a look at other stories because of time. Another interesting story I'm sure Nigerians will be talking about is the face-off between the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, and his 2IC, Idris Wase. I'm getting a feeling that this is about the zoning arrangements of the APC, and perhaps it's escalating now. It's beginning to, permeate into the processes in the House, and other decisions being made.
Interesting developments of how friends have become foes in the face of political interest. Clearly, everybody understands where Femi Gbajabiamila stands. He's a very favored son, if you like, of the president-elect. So whether in the House or out of the House, it appears that his own future is guaranteed, and that he is also instrumental to whatever decision they are making about who becomes his successor in the 10th Assembly. And so you recall that penultimate week, he had adjourned sittings in the House indefinitely, and in some quarters we hear, as journalists, our ears are in the walls, that it was done to avert what appears to be a move to commence some kind of impeachment process against him. I think somewhere underground they had that sorted out and the House had to reconvene. But the tensions are there, obviously, from the way Wase responded to him, the choice of words, like you said, the dramatization
in fact, one of the papers was
he said, "You are trying me."
Yes, I think it was the First News newspaper. Yes. It captured it. It says, "You are challenging me, Gbajabiamila fumes," and then the other one says, "What do you mean?"
What do you mean? Indeed. Yeah. So, as far as representation is concerned, Gbajabiamila is just first among equals. You may be a speaker with some privileges attached. At the end of the day, you represent your people, and Wase is also representing his people. And on that floor, the both of them have the right, to express how they feel about perspective. It was about shortening the activities of the House to enable them attend the commissioning of the National Legislative Institute. But it appears Wase would want a lot of issues to be trashed because he knows that after that sitting, they may not have the opportunity to do another one before a new president is sworn in, and then a lot of things, the dynamics will begin to change with a new chief executive coming on board on Monday, and that could affect a lot of.
But when you see some of these things, the drama between the two leaders of the House of Representatives, and the statement coming from Festus Keyamo, who is Minister of State, and you put that together and you said, well, these are members of the same political party. All along, what happens to the mechanisms in place to, address grievances, to address issues, between them as members of the same political party? And also, let me go back to the issue of the cash, the cash redesign and everything, and the drama that we saw from some of the governors and how they came out for the president and the, central bank governor Godwin Emefiele and all that. You could see that although these were members of the same party, but it doesn't look like, there was this in-house, way of listening to each other and addressing issues before they get out there.
Absolutely. The fact that you are members of the same party doesn't imply that you agree on everything. At the end of the day, every decision, it's about fostering the interest of some persons in party. So let us not pretend that the positions that are taken for the party are for national interest. They are their individual interests projected on us as the national interest. So it's just who calls the shots and what gets given attention. It's even, you see that even with budget designs. If you take the budgets and disaggregate it, you will see the coloration of the budget is a function of the people who worked on the templates. Where you think a project should be cited is a function of who is citing the project. And so it's the same thing with politics. So there was no way they were going to agree on the same thing. What happened at the time was that they had a common goal. The common goal was to return a president from the party. And so their individual aspiration took a back seat. And they threw everything at that common goal. I mean, you are seeing the statement of Ganduje in the face of the meeting between the president-elect and Kwankwaso in France. And that was supposed to be a phone leak, which is a conversation for another day. The level at which private informations are coming to the public sphere, gives one cause for worry. But that's a conversation for another day. But you could see how uncomfortable Ganduje is with that meeting and saying that because Kwankwaso is now the new bride in Kano, it appears that they want to jettison all the things that they have done for them in favor of a new bride. So by the time the president come in and even announce his cabinet and some people miss out, you will
That's
see
where
more.
the real war will start. A lot of people will be feeling entitled that I know.
We did ABC and XYZ.
Exactly, and so if they don't get it,
yes.
it becomes But then, issue of governance is not merely a political issue.
Which is what we should all clamor for. Erifai said something which I completely subscribe to, and that is that the president should not consider the contribution of people to the elections in considering who is the right person to serve this government. There are people who are political, but they have the requisite skills and expertise to help this country come out of its doldrum. You can't begin to wake up and evaluate everybody's competency on the contribution to made to a political the political party.
Well, interesting times ahead, really. A few more days to go. This is today is 25th, so we are counting down. 4 days left for the inauguration of the new government. We'll see how all of that will play out. Well, this is the much we can take on this segment of the show. Unfortunately, our guest reviewer could not join. But we'll take a short breather now, and then when we return, top of the hour, we'll take a look at the headlines again and then go into our discussion of the day, talking about youth and unemployment and also the role of technology. Join us again.
When the situation where you find that they look at the
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that